Eamon, Ruth Lawrence. So the last time we spoke, the case had come to a close, and we discussed how this week we were going to have the closing statements from the prosecution and then the closing statements from the defence. And what would happen after that was the judge would sort of do his closing statements essentially to the jury and direct them. Yeah. So where are we at?
So, well, we're kind of, the judge is halfway through his remarks. So
okay.
We're getting this very kind of, the definition of reasonable doubt and so on. So this has all been explained to the jury. So he hasn't gone over he hasn't started the evidence into the case. But what we did get yesterday and then today was the prosecution and the defence basically making their final remarks to the jury, and it ties in all the evidence. So some of the evidence that you're kind of wondering, what's that about?
Right.
You're seeing now why it's there, and so the jury. So it's often, it's really when you really get into the kind of, I suppose, the meat of the defence at that stage.
The kind of, Okay, so let's start with what the prosecution have to say, and the senior counsel is Michael O'Higgins.
Yeah, it's Michael Higgins with Jane Horgan-Jones backing him up. She took the lead on 1 or 2 days during the trial over the last month. Now it's day 15, but it's been over the last month, the way this has been going. And again, I suppose they're all given this kind of warning the jury that this isn't evidence. This is just the counsel for either side putting their I suppose their view of what the jury have heard.
Yeah.
And so he's more or less, what they were coming at was that Eoin O'Connor, who's one of the victims in this case, along with his friend Anthony Keegan, who Ruth Lawrence is alleged to have murdered in April 2014. Their bodies were found a month after they first went missing on the 22nd of April that year, and they both had suffered gunshot wounds. So Michael Higgins is saying Eoin O'Connor was lured to Patrick's cottage. This is where Ruth Lawrence and her then boyfriend, Neville van de Westhuizen, were living at the time. And he was lured there for the purpose of murdering him. He says there was no evidence that the couple were aware that Anthony Keegan would be with them. And they're alleging she shot Eoin O'Connor intending to kill him. She was not alone. Neville also shot him. He grappled also, they say, with Eoin O'Connor, and then he was shot in the head. Anthony Keegan was shot in the back of the head, and they're surmising he was probably killed first, is the way it was put to the jury. There were attempts to try and hide their trail. They used burner phones, but they led very quickly back to Neville and Ruth, according to the prosecution. And they were making that, there were steps taken to avoid detection. And there was a lack of planning in many aspects, but steps at the same time that were taken were highly calculated, the way it was put. And the couple, they enjoyed a symbiotic relationship, which I had to look up, which is you have two organisms that depend on each other. So it's a mutually beneficial relationship on the basis that he was a drug dealer and she may have enjoyed the product, and this was her report as well.
That was the first that there was mention of that, was it?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it was mentioned. I mean, Stacey, in her evidence, had been asked, about Ruth's appearance, and did she seem, and she did say that she thought that Ruth had a cocaine habit because she sniffed a lot, and on this occasion when she was making this alleged confession that she was speaking very fast, which is typical, according to them, of the way somebody on cocaine would act. So, I mean, they went through all the kind of, the meeting again, how they first met, buying a car from Neville, and then later agreed to, sell a few drugs for them. And they were saying it was like 2 ounces a week. And they go through the Good Friday. So this all happened on the Easter weekends. And part of it, the evidence, the whole case starts, a lot of the prosecution's case starts with the Good Friday of that weekend, and it goes into Easter Monday and then up to the following Friday. And that's kind of the critical time scale. Now, the defence did mention that, look, the case really started a year before. There was this meeting in a Southside pub, according to the Symes, and it was at this that there was some kind of agreement or some kind of agreement reached that Eoin O'Connor's drugs were going to be stolen. But we'll get into that. So he was... There was also, Michael Higgins brings up the man called Mr. CD.
Sorry, his drugs are going to be sold or stolen?
Well, sorry, stolen. Did I say stolen?
Yeah.
Okay.
Did you mean to say stolen?
No, stolen.
Stolen.
No, Eoin O'Connor's drugs were going to be, where there was an agreement that drugs were going to be stolen from a house where Eoin O'Connor stashed some drugs. And this is what the jury had been told. And this was always mentioned that there was some kind of a burglary or some kind of agreement that drugs would be stolen. So this is kind of the milieu we're in. You have these small-time drug dealers, these people that they're kind of working for, and this kind of plot to steal drugs. Now, one of the people that's involved in this, who we just referred to him as Mr. CD, he's regarded, according to Michael Higgins, for the prosecution, he's an important person. At the same time, notable by his absence. There's a lot of interactions which are kind of a pivotal part of the occasion surrounding the events which allegedly went on Good Friday. It was this discussion that Stacey was she was excluded from. She didn't really know what was being discussed, and she didn't know why. And it was mentioned that there was some kind of reason why that Mr. CD wanted to get at Eoin O'Connor, and that was mentioned in court. There was no evidence of any of this ulterior, that whatever Eoin was supposed to have done, that there was none of this mentioned, in terms of evidence. There was no proof of this, and that, to work on the basis that, look, this was said in court, but not to give it any
credence. It's a kind of an overarching theory story in the background.
Yeah, and this is kind of the motivation for
as to why this happens,
drugs being stolen, which the prosecution is saying leads to the events that sees Eoin O'Connor and Anthony Keegan travel to Cavan and being shot dead. And that there's also the whole issue about the guns. So there was, again, they kind of recount about, Stacey driving Neville to Dublin, picking up a bag through a man called Paul, and that he mentioned it was a gun, it was loaded, like Neville did when they were driving back in the car, and then she saw him take it apart and clean it in back in the house in Cavan when they got back. And there's also talking about how at one point Ruth showed off this gun to Stacey in her bedroom, a little small black gun, and Jason said the same as well, that she had seen this weapon, that sometimes she kept it down the back of her trousers, and he thought it was a toy gun, that she was just trying to act the big girl.
And Jason is Stacey's father.
Stacey's father, and they both gave evidence, and you kind of so. They go through, I suppose, the timeline, and then there's...
And Eamon, just to stop you there for 1 second. The father and daughter, they left Ireland and went to the UK along with Ruth Lawrence and her boyfriend, Van der Westhuizen, for a period of time in the aftermath of these two going missing. But they come back to Ireland, and as soon as they come back, they go into the police station and they give statements in regards to what evidence they gave in court, all the way back in 2014. I think during the trial then, the court heard that Lawrence and Van der Westhuizen ended up in South Africa, where he later was caught up in a murder, and he's in jail in South Africa. She was eventually extradited back to Ireland. So the Stacey and Jason Symes, the father and daughter, it was mentioned that they were on witness protection.
Yeah, and that did come up.
So they're state witnesses now.
Yeah, and I suppose that was addressed. I suppose they were asked, what have they got from the state? And Stacey said, look, they're paying the rent, and they paid her educational fees. And I think Jason mentioned at one point he got a motorbike, but fell off it and hurt himself. Patrick Gageby in his closing remarks, he points this out to the jury that, these are people who are essentially have gotten something out of the state. And he suggested in his remarks, to the jury that they'd played the system, and they were trying to play you, the jury, as well. So, he was quite kind of forthright on this, in that particular kind of issue as well.
But we can't comment on that, of course, because for a jury.
Yeah, and it's up to the jury to decide. And they're kind of told, look, it's up to you to decide whether you find the Symes to be credible. I mean, certainly his viewpoint was very much... I mean, nobody was arguing about the men being murdered. It's accepted they were murdered. They were shot dead. There's no other way you can describe their deaths except as murder. Patrick Gageby's in his statement is saying that basically Ruth wasn't on this Good Friday trip down to Dublin, where supposedly the drugs were stolen, and that, and she didn't shoot anybody, that there's no evidence, that the only evidence against her is what was said by the Symes. And he was suggesting that these are not necessarily... Well, he asked the jury to decide if they can trust what is being said, and if that trust is there, is it strong enough to return a guilty verdict. And part of it was, I suppose, pointing out some of the inconsistencies that were there. Like they both, Jason and Stacey, spoke about, I suppose, the same timeline, the Good Friday, the Easter Monday, and they might have had different, there was details that were different. Like, for instance, Stacey mentioned about, ditching 2 mobile phones, and Jason, when he was asked were there any phones ditched, he said no, there weren't. And so he's pointing out as many of these kind of inconsistencies as he can to, I suppose, to pick at the state's case. And
does O'Higgins point to, when he talks about the Symes evidence, does he point to corroboration to that or anything?
Yeah, well, that's what the phone evidence is there for. I think, they're trying to say, they were telling the story of going down to Dublin and then being back in Cavan and then, heading off back down to Rosslare. And certainly the events, say, between, from the Good Friday until the following Wednesday, Thursday. And the prosecution argument is that a lot of the phone evidence will back up exactly what they said, that there was some of the texts that were there, showed that there was contact there, that there was, that basically Ruth knew what was going on is their contention. And even they were actually making the argument that the fact that there was, for a couple of hours while Ruth was supposedly in Dublin, they were saying her phone was still in the cottage, but the prosecution were making the point her phone was in the cottage, but this is a phone the day before before they all left for Dublin, according to the Times. They could see on the phone records, she didn't leave it alone. There was a lot of calls. There was text messages. There was missed calls. And then after, in the period when everybody had gone to Dublin, this phone, the only traffic that was seen in it was this data reconnection to the mast, suggesting that the phone was there possibly on its own. Maybe she was asleep. We don't know any of that. But they were trying to point it out that this was actually a negative for the defence and a positive for the prosecution. So this is the kind of the corroborative evidence, I guess. The phone evidence is there. And they also have that when they were talking about when they're coming back from Dublin on the Good Friday, there was a checkpoint and a guard did give evidence that he did stop a young woman driving a Nissan Micra and gave her a warning about her NCT and remembered because of that. And again, that was, that was specific to the date where it was mentioned that they had all travelled to Dublin. And again, that fitted exactly with the mobile phone evidence as well. So all of these kind of strands of circumstantial evidence are kind of being put together by the prosecution to make it look like that, to kind of make the argument that this was a joint enterprise.
So what else had O'Higgins to say in relation to the prosecution case?
Well, there was one interesting, like some of the phones that were handed in, they were able to extract text, and he suggests that some of these show that Ruth and Neville were a comfortable and a relaxed couple together. They were comfy in their own skins and at ease with each other. So it was a kind of an insight into, they're not going to. They don't want to. I suppose they want to say, look, she's an equal partner in this relationship, and that this is borne out in some of these texts that they got. That they were able to see. He mentions a couple of other, I suppose, the red flags of the, like things like there was parts of what they say were a mobile found that was found in the remains of a fire at Patrick's cottage. I mean, who burns a mobile phone? The question was asked. And again, this is suggesting that this was a red flag, as he was putting it, looking for the boat to go out on the lake at a time when they were, possibly planning on moving bodies. Again, that was something else.
And what was that evidence? That was Ruth Lawrence was looking for the boat to go out on the lake?
Because we'd heard from their landlord that she'd contacted him looking for a boat. And then, further on to that then was looking for an outboard motor, which they returned on the Thursday, which the April the 22nd, I suppose, is when the two men first went missing.
That was the Tuesday.
Yeah. So, I mean, I suppose the way to put it, what Michael Higgins put it was not a well-planned murder, but there are, as he said, there were elements that were well calculated, and that the whole, the whole use of burner phones and, those elements that were kind of showing some kind of awareness about trying to cover their tracks showed that while wasn't planned well, that there was quite a bit of thought put into it at the same time. Mm-hmm. Michael Higgins was also putting it in that Stacey, very much stuck to her guns when it was put to her that she didn't shoot anyone, or that it was Neville who had done it. She replied it was Ruth who said that. She was adamant that she did say it. And then there was a remark when Neville, that Ruth had said something that Anthony Keegan had said that Eoin was his friend and he'd die for him. And again, that was put to her, and he said, no, Ruth said that. And that also, according to the prosecution, puts the two dead men in the car with Neville and Ruth as well. So it's another step. They will contend, like in the evidence, for the jury to return a guilty verdict on that one.
So they have concentrated on this evidence of these two state witnesses who we're told are in witness protection, and they are calling on the strands that they say, the prosecution say, corroborate what they have to say, the phone evidence and other statements that have been made. Do they refer to, wasn't there some evidence given about a hatchet in the house?
No,
machete.
there was evidence given, and there was these 4 machetes shown to the jury. But really, that was to put Mr. Butaris, who's the foreign individual. He was referred to either as the foreigner or the KFC man. Butaris is his surname. And the fact that Stacey and Jason both remember this man being in the cottage on the Wednesday night when they found him in this kind of panic state, and they felt that this guy was hyper and possibly drugged up, and he was waving a machete and saying, "You're after bringing the police here to us," and there was supposedly a helicopter in the vicinity or something like that, and that kind of rooted him in the house. And the showing of these machetes then would have helped, I suppose, corroborate again their story. And Butaris was asked about that. Were you brandishing a machete? And he said, well, he had picked one up just to inspect it, but he wasn't saying that he was in any way in the condition as being described by the 2 Symes. And he was asked about his Garda statement, and there was differences between, let's say, his Garda statement and what he said in court. But I suppose at the same point, the fact that he was in the house when the Symes said he was certainly gave credence to, or the prosecution would say it gives credence, to their version of events.
So after the 15-day trial, how long did it take O'Higgins to sum up the prosecution case?
It was about 3 hours, I'd say. It was over. Yeah, it was about 3 hours, 3 or 4 hours. It's hard to tell. Time flies.
I know. Sometimes there's the breaks, of course, in the court as well. So, but pretty much most of Monday was
and the half day today then as well with Patrick Gageby, who was going through his evidence, or not his evidence.
So Ruth Lawrence gave no evidence. She didn't get into the witness box.
As she's entitled not to, and there's the onus is on the state to prove the case, and she has the presumption of innocence. That Ruth Lawrence is an innocent person until a jury says otherwise, if they do go down that route, or if she's acquitted. So as we stand, Ruth Lawrence is an innocent person. She's not guilty of any crime. And
the onus of proof on murder is
it's entirely
beyond reasonable doubt.
And and I suppose Patrick Gageby was coming straight out, he, almost in his very, very first few remarks to the jury. He said that the phone evidence, there was a lot of it heard, and it was quite meticulous and went on for 2 or 3 days. And he says it doesn't establish that Ruth Lawrence shot Eoin O'Connor or was part of a plan to do so, or even that she was in Dublin on the 18th of April. He says this he reminded the jury that the case on behalf of the state really depends on the evidence in Jay and Stacey Sims as saying that Ruth, admitted to being the shooter or assisting somebody in this crime.
Okay. So what else does he argue in her defence?
Well, he attacked the Symeses, I suppose, their credibility. And one of the things he came out with was that, this whole trip down to Good Friday, which he's contending that there's no proof put before the jury that Ruth was there. And Jay and Stacey Symes would have said that at one point Neville borrowed their car and they were left hanging around and they're waiting in Burger King late on Good Friday night into the early hours of the next day. And he was saying he was asking the jury, what's the importance of the Burger King? And he said it's a form of an alibi. And he said they obviously thought that the car had been gone to go to wherever Eoin O'Connor's stash was there, and that in there. And he's trying to suggest that there was an element of thought here that they were establishing that they had nothing to do with this robbery of the drugs.
Stealing of the drugs.
Yeah, and he was quite, he was kind of saying while he was making the point, whatever level they're dealing at, it wasn't end of the world stuff, but it doesn't mean that they're fundamentally dishonest. But he said at the same time, he suggested that they were downplaying. He reminded the jury of the witnesses, the neighbours, who talked about a stream of people calling to the house. He says 30 people a day. He says you have to ask, to
the Symes house.
Yeah, to the Symes house in Woodlands and Ballyjames and Cavan. He said, do you really think this is 2 ounces a week, or the 2 ounces that they said they were selling, or is that an understatement? So that's he's, and he also pointed out there was this statement then from Sean Symes, who is Jason and Stacey's brother and Jason's son. And now he didn't give evidence in court, but his statement was admitted, and he gave a very as Patrick Gage would say, a very different narrative on the meeting on the Monday, Easter Monday, when Eoin O'Connor came to the house. According to the Symes, it was friendly enough. Stacey said Eoin was a lovely guy. Jason said, look, he was kind of a friend. They'd bonded over one time when he had a dog, and he got on well with the dog, and so they became friends and that. And he owed him money for cigarettes, and he gave him whatever few hundred quid he had in the house at the time, and that there was no great pressure. But Sean talks about how, there was a sense of they didn't want to talk in front of him. And that he was he was a big guy, and he felt that there was something wrong. Like his father asked him to take his other younger child away with him, and he said he'd never done that before. He touched him on his arm, and he felt as if he was trying to say something. And again, his partner Celine also kind of is pretty forthright as well, in that, this wasn't the happy kind of meeting.
What did he say in relation to the witness protection program? Did he describe to the jury, what that was, or?
It wasn't actually explained to the jury what witness protection is. It's called the Witness Security Program, and I don't think that they probably need to at this stage. I think most people would be aware of what it is. And while, he was trying to suggest, look, they got something out of it. And as I kind of said already, that they didn't get any punishment for all they were involved with, from the previous Good Friday all through the week when the two men were murdered. He says they didn't get any punishment at all, and they got government support, and that they've downplayed their role as drug dealers and in the events that happened, and they played the system and tried to play you, is what he said to the jury. And that was really kind of, I suppose, that's always going to be the argument, really, in any case. If there's a witness, a protected witness, are they motivated by some ulterior motives? But it's been,
and bearing in mind that it was 2014 when this these murders occurred. It is quite a long time coming to court, and the reason for that, of course, is because of the extradition from South Africa, which happened in 2023, Ruth Lawrence. And I think we heard during the trial that Van der Westhuizen will, when he finishes his sentence in relation to what is a murder kidnap, he will eventually be extradited back to Ireland. It has the
potential to become live again.
Yeah.
It's really in the hands of the South African government. The request is there from Ireland. So, if he gets parole, they can reactivate that request.
Yeah.
Or if he finishes his sentence, which it won't be till 2035, they can do it then.
So have the families of Eoin O'Connor and Anthony Keegan gathered in the court for the kind of the finalisation of this trial?
Yeah, well, there's been members of both families have been there throughout the trial. There's at least 2 full benches that have been reserved for family members. They've been there. And then, of course, there was 2 of... There was 2 of Eoin O'Connor's brothers, Brian and Rory, gave evidence, about the contact they had, and also Anthony Keegan's sister Margaret was also there, and she gave, evidence about, her fears and about him going missing and reporting him missing to the Gardaí as well. So
the judge will sum up for the jury, and he will, can do that he started that, so that'll continue tomorrow, and eventually he will ask the jury to go and start their deliberations in relation to this, and then we wait.
Yeah, and so you know yourself, when it goes to a jury, you don't really know how long it's going to take, and and whether or not they'll be. They have
a lot to consider, Eamon, though, after 15 days of evidence.
Yeah, and some of the evidence was heard 3 weeks ago. So so people will need to remind themselves, and I guess that's what a lot of the closing statements are about as well. Yeah. It's about reminding jury to look at all the evidence and not just what they've heard most recently.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll wait and see. Thanks, Eamon.
Always a pleasure, Nicola.
I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.